Welcome back. You're listening to Conservative Conversations with Tom Sarrouf. My guest today is Brian Brown, who's the founder and executive director of the Anselm Society, a Colorado-based organization dedicated to a renaissance of the Christian imagination. His writing, teaching, and podcasting focuses on equipping Christians to see, live, and work like the people of heaven. He's the co-editor of Why We Create, Reflections on the Creator, the Creation, and Creating, and he's a contributing editor to several scholarly works, including Why Place Matters, edited by Wilfred McClay, and Faithful Creativity, which is a forthcoming book edited by Matthew Neerman. He's also authored the Arts and Culture section of the Almanac of American Philanthropy, and he lives in Colorado Springs with his wife and 2 children. And we talk in the episode about art, why conservatives should care about art, what's going well and what's going not so well in the world of artistic creation today, and the relationship between art and the church and artists and churches. So we hope you enjoy the episode.
Join the best in the movement. It's Conservative Conversations with ISI, educating for liberty since 1953.
Brian, thanks for joining me today. As someone who is involved and cares about art and religion, and I think we're going to talk a lot about the intersection of the two and how they interface, but for the audience of Conservative Conversations, why should conservatives care about art?
I suppose on some level that's I feel like there's a long list of questions that we ask these days that you sort of have to look in the mirror and go, we have to ask that now? And I would definitely put this in that category. I think probably what's happened that causes that question to even be asked historically is, let's imagine it's 1,000 years ago. All right. You live in some village in Europe, and you have, as part of that village, you have a tribe, you have the stories that you tell each other to pass on an identity. This is who we are. This is what we love. These are the gods that we worship. This is what we view as noble or heroic on the one hand, and evil and reprehensible on the other. You probably create visual art that's part of your communal rituals. It's not just a cute thing to look at in a museum. It's part of, again, passing on an identity. This is all normal human behavior, and it's universal human behavior. It's only relatively recently that we've started creating art as more self-expression. So I think the best way I can answer that question is by pointing to that earlier understanding of art. Somebody has to be creating the stories, the songs, the images, the films that both articulate who we are and pass on who we are. And from a conservative standpoint, you have to have the past and future dynamic to that. Who have we been in light of that? And in light of today's challenges, who do we want to be? So if we look at art that way, I think the answer is somewhat self-explanatory. If we're thinking of art as just self-expression, then it's much easier to say, all right, here's a particular kind of music, a particular kind of painting, and I'm not into that sort of thing. That's fine, right? That's a totally separate conversation, but we have to care about art because we have to care about these questions of who we are, how we tell our children who we are, and where we go from here.
Hey there, listener. I wanted to take a quick moment to thank you for listening to Conservative Conversations. This podcast is a production of the Intercollegiate Studies Institute, and our mission here at ISI is educating for liberty. If you'd like to join us in fulfilling our mission, consider helping us by rating and reviewing this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to help us reach more listeners like yourself. Now, back to the show. That's very well said. And I'd be curious as a follow-up to that, what the relationship or what the role for self-expression is in art. I'm reminded of something from Christopher Dawson on art and civilization, and I'm probably going to butcher this, but I'll paraphrase to the effect of art is both a reflection of, or a great artist is a reflection of a great civilization, but art also contributes to the greatness of a civilization or a great artist. So you think of, pick a great artist, Michelangelo, Leonardo. They're both a representative or indicate the heights of civilization, Florentine civilization, let's say, but on the other hand, they're part of the creation of why we remember Florence or why we remember, this place or that place. So what is the role of individual self-expression or the triumph of the individual great artist or great musician or great poet versus the more, I would describe it as a communitarian function that I think you described?
Yeah, I think we almost assume that the artist is supposed to be an eccentric genius, right? We have that image of the wild-haired Beethoven or something. But one of the things that we talk about in the Anselm Society is the notion that we need a lot more centric geniuses. It is understandable sometimes for someone who has some kind of artistic gift, songwriting or filmmaking or whatever it might be, to look around at their community, immediate or larger, and think, these people don't really get me. One of the things they tend to forget, though, is that most of us actually feel that way. Most of us actually feel, at least until we hit a certain age, that nobody really understands us, and we're the only one who feels like that. And you know what? Your engineering friends feel the same way. And we need more centric geniuses. We need more people who wrestle with where they feel like they do or don't fit in, but commit to the hard work of becoming a part of a community, a part of a civilization. Art does have a prophetic role, this role of kind of calling a culture towards perhaps what it's forgotten to be or what it needs to change to be. But that's much harder to do from the fringes. If you haven't invested in meaningful relationships, to use Chesterton has had this analogy of the white picket fence. You're walking along a field and you see this fence, and there's a certain kind of person that looks at the fence and goes, I don't understand why this fence is here. I think I should tear it down. We all know people like that. But a wise person looks at the fence and goes, I don't know why this fence is here. I should find out. And art is the same way. It's much easier to be that prophetic voice, bringing your unique style, your unique point of view to a culture, if you actually understand what you're saying, what's actually new, what's actually relevant or irrelevant, what has been said before. T.S. Eliot wrote a great essay called Tradition and the Individual Talent, where he explores exactly this concept. And this is not true just of art. This is true of anything. I would not be so arrogant as to come along and say, I am a unique mathematical genius. I have never, in fact, studied basic arithmetic or anything that added up to this tradition we call math, but I'm positive I know more than everyone else and they should all listen to me. No, I study math and I work my way through the grades and I get to a point where I have at least a cursory knowledge of everything that has been established in that field so far. Now I know whether there's something new to be said that I can contribute to it. So with art, I want to see more centric geniuses. I want to see more people who learn to love a thing and understand why it's there, so that when they want to add something new or unique or call it to a new chapter of its history, they have a voice that's speaking from that posture of love rather than that posture of disgust, right? If you watch almost any, not to call anyone out, but almost any Disney film from the last 5 years, there's so much contempt for our sort of normal historical civilizational values. You can tell a lot, not all, but a lot of the filmmakers just have disgust for things that normal people value very much, and probably for the people who hold those values. That's not an effective way to communicate. It's not an effective way to try to accomplish anything. Learn to love what's worth loving before you try to change it.
That's I like that. We need more centric geniuses because I think there is this sense or this part of maybe an artistic tradition of the artist standing contra mundum or subverting or pushing boundaries. I feel like there's part of a sense of artists pushing boundaries, which reminds me of something that Roger Scruton said in his little Beauty, a very short introduction, is unlike the true and the good, the beautiful is still part of that, and they're all but the beautiful challenges us, or there is a way in which it's subversive, and I'm wondering if you think there's a proper place for that within the category of the centric genius and the maybe the innovator from within a tradition and from within a love for that tradition, rather than a I'm going to push boundaries and try to open up more space for myself. The sort of maybe the love of civilization and of God versus the love of the self to the detriment of those other things.
Yeah. Sorry, what was the question in that?
Oh, sorry. What role is there for like a subversive element of beauty in art, as opposed to, I think, the eccentric piece of kind of like the tearing down or pushing boundaries or trying to degrade a civilization rather than build it up. There's still that subversive piece, even if you're maybe if you're going to be in a
Yeah.
civilization building in the way that you're or creating art in the way that you're describing. What do you think about the subversion within the tradition of construction?
Yeah, I mean, I would look at that. I think it's a good insight, and I think I would look at it historically. You see people trying to push on the idea of objective beauty around the same time you see people starting to push on the idea of objective truth. And I think conservatives, particularly politically active conservatives, will point to the subversion of truth. Right? They'll talk about they'll pick their favorite, wherever they. Sorry, let me back up. They will pick their favorite point in history where I think it started here, right? Maybe it's this or that point in the Enlightenment. Maybe it's this or that point in the rise of the progressives in the late 19th, early 20th century. Whenever it is, there's the point where people started saying, "Oh, well, maybe truth is relative." They don't always pay quite as much attention to the voices doing the same with beauty, but you have visual artists and composers in particular in the 19th century doing much the same thing, saying the things that people used to find beautiful, I don't find beautiful, I want to do new things. Now, nobody wakes up in the middle of the 19th century and starts challenging goodness, right? Goodness is a terrible thing. And C.S. Lewis talks about this in Mere Christianity, and just the notion that you go around the world, nobody admires people who run away in battle and or betrays those closest to him. But you look at the world now, and now you can get canceled for doing things that, historically speaking, 5 minutes ago you would have been given a medal for. So these things really are wrapped up in each other, and looking at it in that sort of stretched out historical way makes it a little bit easier to see. When you start chipping away at the foundations of one of these, what's called the transcendentals, goodness, truth, and beauty, they're all aspects of reality. They're aspects of the same thing. If you start chipping away at one, you will lose the other two sooner or later. And that's where we are now. We're arguing on social media with our next door neighbors who, under normal circumstances, we probably would have been having a cookout with. We're having these horrible arguments and having all of this hatred build up over all three of them, goodness and truth and beauty. What gets to count as true? What gets to count as good or evil? And what gets to count as beautiful or ugly? That is a difficult area. It's a difficult time to live through. All of reality is an ever-expanding Starbucks menu, and yet at the same time, the correct answers on that menu seem to be getting shorter and shorter.
That's a great place to just pick up the question is, how do you know, especially if you're an untrained eye, perhaps? I would say I'm an untrained eye when it comes to looking at visual art. How do I know that what I'm looking at is, or maybe I hear or see, if we want to bring in other categories of artistic creation, how do I know when that's good? What are the fruits of good art? And then, what are the fruits of bad art? Or how do I know what I'm looking at is bad or ugly?
Yeah, well, I'm curious. Have you ever had an experience where you were looking at something you knew you were supposed to like right? It's in the museum for a reason, or I had to study it and everybody tells me it's brilliant, but it's not clicking. Have you ever had an experience like that?
Yeah, I have. I mean, I couldn't name a specific painting, but I kind of go through art museums. I'm maybe doing better. My girlfriend's an art historian, so she's trying to engage me more, which I think is very helpful.
She's
But
working
like,
on you.
yeah, she's working on me, and I think it's doing something. But the for most of my life, it's like I walk through an art museum and I enjoy it. It's nice, it's peaceful, and I'm like, that's nice, but I don't really see it very clearly, or necessarily understand the genius. People go, that's genius. I'm like, I don't get it. I'm not so sure. Then there's some things I look at and I'm like, I think that's ugly, and other people are like, no, it's brilliant, it's amazing, and I'm like, maybe I don't have a good interior compass. I don't know. Maybe it's me. Maybe it's a function of culture, a combination. I'm not sure, but does that question make sense?
Yeah, I think it was more common for more of history for good art to have more universal accessibility to go with its sort of higher plane stuff. So, an example I would use would be if you watch one of the early Pixar films like Toy Story or The Incredibles or something. You watch one of those movies, they work on multiple levels. There's this movie is technically for 7-year-olds level, where all you need to be able to get is who the characters are, what they care about, what's at stake, and you're fine. Now, there's an adult level, though. There's all these inside jokes that you're only going to get if you're a grown up. And most art used to work this way. And in fact, Madeline L'Engle said that if something's not good enough for us, it's not good enough for our children. Even good children's art should be something that you can enjoy as a grown-up, something you can come back to year after year, decade after decade, and appreciate on new levels. Good art should work that way. And there's a couple reasons why it doesn't sometimes. One is that we are sometimes just removed from the culture it came from. The Bible is this way. There are all kinds of references and even inside jokes in the Bible that the original readers of the Bible would have gotten that we now need a theology teacher to explain to us, right? And a lot of art is the same way. There's a little bit of a lost in translation element, even if some of the aspects are universal. So that's part of the problem. Another part of the problem, sure, is, maybe we're the problem. And we just need our tastes cultivated. I used to really not be a big fan of cheese unless it was melted on a cheeseburger. I'd walk past the cheese section in the grocery store and almost everything there I could tell I would not enjoy it. But I knew that, hey, cheese is objectively a good thing. Wonderful people all over the planet love cheese and put all this effort into making it. So I just decided I was going to spend a year learning to like cheese. So every time I went to the grocery store, I'd go to that little bargain bin where they would have the smaller cuts of things that were cheaper. And I would just pick one and I'd go home and try it. And most of the time I didn't like it right away, but I did that one cheese, probably 2 or 3 per month, for a year. And at the end of it, I didn't like all of them, but I had learned to like it as a thing. And I also had a cheese guy at that point because I really got to know the main guy that was working the counter there, and I could ask him questions and I could say, I'm serving this or that drink, and please, what should I pair with what else I'm having? So there is an aspect to which there are a lot of wonderful things that ask us to rise to them, and that requires explanation, training. It might just require practice. I'll stop there. There's probably a third point that I should make, but I can't. I lost it along the way, so I should probably cut out that last bit there.
Yeah, for sure. I want to turn to the Anselm Society because that maybe gets us into the training or the immersion in this world. What is the Anselm Society? What do you guys do? Why do you do it? How is it started?
The Anselm Society was started about 12 years ago. I chased a girl out to Colorado Springs from Washington, D.C. and got married. And Well, I grew up in California, but I'd been living on the East Coast for about 6 years. And pardon me. I've been living on the East Coast for about 6 years, and I had learned to appreciate a lot of the history that you can kind of take for granted there, just how old a lot of things are, and how much time people have invested in trying to make things beautiful, or just how much history happened there. I had a strong community there. Moving anywhere and starting over is a lot of work and takes years before you can look around and go, yeah, this is home now. And when I moved out to Colorado Springs, I had another challenge, which was that it was also very suburban, which is to say it sprawls and sprawls for miles in every direction, but there aren't all that many given places in its geography that were worth caring about. It's just the same concrete and asphalt and strip malls and cookie cutter houses. So I'm looking at that landscape compared to what I had come from, and I'm asking, where is the beauty? Where do I find people who enjoy the things that I enjoy and make friends with them? What does it look like to build community in a place like this? And I sat down with my pastor and just figured I would do what a lot of people have done throughout history and community-wise, start with church. And I asked how I could get more involved. We decided to start a lecture series. And next thing we knew, this was the interesting part, a couple hundred people came out to hear a scholar from Oxford. And a couple hundred people came out to hear a scholar from, I forget where the second one was from, but we were bringing out these people to talk about theology and literature. We had a talk on Shakespeare, a talk on Dostoevsky, a talk on Narnia. And all these people were coming out saying that they had seen the world the way I was seeing it. Where's the beauty? Where are the, in their case, Christians who care about these sorts of things? Why is it that the best stories, the things that make me cry, the things that make me want to go back and reread them and rewatch them and have shaped who I am, why is it that they are so underappreciated in their experience with church? Well, okay, at that point, we've all found each other and realized, as I mentioned earlier, our experience wasn't so unique. Now it's time to build. So now we've spent 12 years building partly some reform mechanisms as far as how can we make church a little bit more like Middle Earth? Because in a lot of traditions, it has been and could be again. How can we get a little more of that magic in the way that we encounter reality? But we also wanted to create new art. So the vast majority of people involved in the Anselm Society are not artists. I'm not an artist. We're just normal people who love Lord of the Rings and great music and the kinds of stories that people have always told each other to, around the campfire to develop meaning and a sense of identity and shape heroism and courage and nobility in each other. We want more of those stories. Well, the only way to get more of those stories is to cultivate a love for them and cultivate people who steep themselves in those kinds of stories. And then, like I said earlier, try to add to the tradition, try to dialogue with what has come before, with new music and new stories. And 12 years in, we've been doing that ever since.
Fantastic. And I want to pick up on this thread of trying to live in Middle Earth or live in Narnia, the influence of C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien in these circles is a vague term, but places, people who love culture, people who appreciate Christianity, trying to live a Christian faith, and care about beauty and art and culture. There's such a fascination with the Inklings and people want to live in Narnia or want to live like hobbits do. I'm really curious because great works of literature, great movies, great soundtracks. I love Howard Shore.
Sure.
They're a complete study in civilization in some respects. But I'm very curious, why is there such a strong draw to? I think these two of the Inklings, that is just it's such a powerful thing for so many people.
Yeah, on a surface level, I mean, Lewis and Tolkien had a conversation with each other where they literally said to each other, well, not enough people are writing the stories we want to read, so I guess we'll have to write them ourselves. And on some level, there's something there that we should emulate, right? Like, I'm glad they did that, and now people need to do that for our time. But there's also, they had also spent their entire lives equipping themselves to do that. At any point in history, a good artist didn't think of themselves as an artist in the sense that we alluded to earlier, the sort of I'm such a special person, oblivious to normal life and immune from the calls of ordinary mortals. That's not what an artist was for most of history. For most of history, an artist would have considered himself a craftsman. I'm somebody that actually learns this craft and apprentices under a master and does the vast majority of my work for a while, helping that master do their work. Maybe I eventually get my own workshop and I get to do my own visual art or stonemasonry or whatever it is. And so there was that much more of a sense of mastering the tradition before you got to put your own spin on it. And then when you got to put your own spin on it, you had all of these weapons to fight with, so to speak. So you wouldn't have gotten Mozart without Bach. You wouldn't have gotten these great people who did cathedrals. You go all over Europe and you see all these incredible churches that were built before modern power tools and everything. And some of them took not only decades, but sometimes hundreds of years to finish. You don't get that if you don't have this long-term view, both of what you're learning from and of what you're building for. And really the last great people who did that level of mastery, achieved that level of mastery as a study, and then dedicated that mastery to creating things for posterity, to continue the tradition, were Lewis and Tolkien. I think that's why what they did resonates so much. They had developed the muscles to do what they did to set out well. And then what they were actually trying to do was write things normal people could love and be shaped by, but then could be elevated by and called into a fuller picture of reality than they'd experienced prior to that.
That makes sense, and it's very well put. And I want to build on that by asking, and also going back to what we were talking about earlier with the idea of cultivation, is cultivating one's imagination. And there's maybe a techne of doing that. But then there's also content. There's the specific, what is going to be the formation or the basis or the content of what cultivates or informs my sense of imagination. And there's, I think maybe just kind of reading up on the Anselm Society a little bit, there's a sense that there's like a secular imagination, but then there's the Christian imagination. And I guess it's a two-part question. What's the difference, knowing that there is a difference? But also, if we're talking about the connection between truth, goodness, and beauty, and Christianity as a true worldview, or as a true way of life philosophy, it's a true religion. Can one have a secular imagination at all, or does it have to be tied to the truth, the Christian faith?
Yeah, I guess on some level, you could argue you can't do anything in a secular fashion. Everybody has their own answer, implicit or explicit, to the question, what is God? Or at least, right, what is the highest thing? What matters more than anything else? Everyone, even if they can't answer that question verbally, lives according to an answer to that question. So we use the word secular simply as a shorthand for the reality outside of organized religion, but also to some extent the reality shaped by intentional philosophical and cultural atheism, nihilism. I mean, you can talk about it from that point of view, or simply the public square where arguments made from the revealed truth of religion are not as welcome as they once were. But yeah, on some level, secular in the sense of not religious isn't a thing. Whatever I think is most valuable, I will order my life accordingly and have habits and rhythms and almost worship rituals accordingly. Whether the thing I think is most important is money or power or the respect of others or Netflix. But on the Christian end of that, to a Christian, Christianity is the Chuck Colson called it an explanation of all reality. Lewis called it the true myth. It isn't a story of reality that's one among many. It is in fact the story of reality, the story of the universe. And so for the Christian, the reason that goodness, truth, and beauty are different aspects of the same thing is that the world was created by and for Christ, a person, not only a man, but someone who became incarnated as a man. Well, okay, you can't look at God, you can't look at the thing you worship above everything else and say, oh, it's only good, it's not true and beautiful. Right? It's all of those things. Everything else stems from that. And because his fingerprints are on all of reality, you can essentially plumb the depths of reality in any field, whether it's biology or art. You can always ask that next follow-up question. And if you are pursuing truth, you are getting closer to God. You are finding things about him. And there are contemporary figures like Jonathan Pajot who are doing a really good job kind of unpacking the symbolic aspects of nature and storytelling and all kinds of stuff. But this is also why Christians drove such incredible developments in science for so many years. If the world is intelligible and has the fingerprints of a maker, we can learn about that world. We can learn about, by extension, its maker. We can get to know that maker better. So to have a Christian imagination on some level is to see heaven and earth as a great deal more interrelated and overlapping than the image most of us have, where we live in this material world down here, which is not magical and not spiritually important. And then there's this vague vision of cherubs on clouds with harps. That's not the Christian account of reality, but it's the reality that most of us have picked up somehow.
I think, or I wonder if part of that is the relationship between art and the institutions of the church or the churches. And I know that's something that you focus on a lot at the Anselm Society. So what's the current state of play when it comes to the relationship between art and churches, not both physical material churches and the institutional or sort of spiritual body of Christ? And then, what would you say is the proper role or the sort of role that you're trying to recover or promote with the Anselm Society between art, artists, and the institutional church?
That's several huge questions disguised as one question, but I'll take a crack at it. The relationship between art and church. I've never met a pastor, I've never encountered a church congregation that didn't have art as part of its worship service. It might be a rock band, it might be a guy with a guitar, it might be an organ, it might be a cappella singing. There might be tons of visual imagery and iconography and stained glass, or it might be intentionally very, not ugly, but very plain, because they want you to focus your attention on spiritual things. But there's art in all of it. I think what has changed over the years and what a lot of kind of Gen Xers, millennials, and younger have grown up with is a world where the art of the church is essentially faded imitations of the art of secular society around it. Whatever was cool in society 10 years ago musically is what we're doing in church, only we put Jesus in the lyrics. And it used to be the opposite. It used to be that Christians were plumbing the depths of what was possible in music, just like they were doing it in science. And then the echoes of that rolled off into society and folk music and whatnot. At the same time, they could draw from styles that were familiar in folk music and pull them into the church. The early Lutherans and Anglicans and the hymns that they sang, for example, were essentially just folk music, the music of the people, but with new lyrics directed to God. That's not quite the same as taking pop art, because you're taking something that sort of belongs to you as the people. But it's not entirely dissimilar either. I think the challenge that a lot of us grew up with is that it wasn't so much that art wasn't welcome in the church. It was that challenging art wasn't welcome in the church. And often challenging questions weren't welcome. I am not entirely sure how big a problem that actually was. I haven't met that many pastors that wake up in the morning thinking, how can I stifle someone's creative dreams today? Or I really hope no one asks me a hard question about Jesus because I'm sure there isn't an answer. But a lot of people seem to have internalized the idea that that was normal 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. So as we look forward, I see a lot of pastors who are not afraid of the hard questions, who want people to come in and ask the hardest questions they've got, bring all of their doubts. And I see a lot of artists that want to create challenging art. And some are doing the hard work of dialoguing with the tradition and being formed by it. And others are a little more free form, but still with a lot of the same motivations. I think the future of the relationship between church and art is headed in a really positive direction. Whatever it was 10 years ago, we're trending, I think, in the right direction.
Well, it's very encouraging to hear, and I'd actually like to end on a positive note here because my colleague Jane Charles, who you know, when she was on our podcast, that was a while ago, but she was telling us about sort of contemporary poets and artists and playwrights who are doing really amazing things. And, you know, if we think about the trajectory or history of art, especially if you're more conservative, you tend to poo-poo the modern and contemporary stuff. And when I look at it in the museum, like there's a sense in which we were talking earlier, I don't necessarily get, like, just to pick on the Mona Lisa, just as an example everyone knows, or Starry Night, it's like, oh, it's nice, but like, I don't really get why people think it's so genius. That's an uninitiated thing. But when I look at like a square on a whole wall with a little red square, I'm like, this is you're joking, right? So that's like the conservative impulse, but to see all the modern stuff, but it's not all bad, certainly. And I'd be curious to hear from your perspective, you know, who are some of the good artists out there right now? What are they doing? Where can we find them? And how can we connect with all the good stuff that's happening in the art world right now?
Yeah, I love that question. And I think the big thing with all of this is there conservatism and conservatives, especially intellectual conservatives, do tend to have this reputation for the grumpy old man thing. And honestly, I think it was Roger Scruton who said everyone's right wing about the things they know the most about, which is a fair point. Like the more you know about something, the more you understand why the fences are there and the more annoyed you're going to get if someone starts messing with the accepted norms. But yeah, when we venture outside of what is comfortable or what we've experienced before or what we've been trained to understand, there is a tendency to go, I don't understand it, therefore it's not worth valuing. And that's especially true if we get the notion that our tribe would validate us for disliking that particular thing. It's very easy to go, that vaguely reminds me of abstract art or postmodernism or something. Therefore, I can knock it and I'll get away with it. No one's really going to call me on that. we need to do the hard work. Sometimes we can look at something and go, everyone I respect hates this thing. Maybe it's not the best use of my time to invest 10 years of my life studying it. I'm going to do something else. That's legitimate. You got to prioritize time. You got to make hard decisions. However, on the things that where there are good and thoughtful people who have known life and love for the truth, who appreciate them and you don't, do the Chesterton's fence thing and start asking the questions about why they're there. And I particularly have no respect for people who say, I had this hard question about a thing, whether it's something about religion or something about art or something else, and nobody had the answers. Nobody would give me the answers for this. Please, YouTube is a thing. Look it up. You're not trying very hard. So as I look around, you pick an area, Jane, there's not really such a thing as a known world-class poet anymore, but to the extent that that's a thing, that's what Jane is. You can see her poetry on the internet or buy it on Amazon, and it's world-class poetry, world-class playwriting. There are people like Andrew Peterson in the more folk music kind of realm, acoustic music, that are writing songs that draw from the best stories and the best theology. And they're so human and so universal and yet so particular that it is hard to get through a lot of them without crying if you have experienced anything in life. On the visual art, and there are people like Makoto Fujimura on the more abstract side, or Josh Thiessen on the more representative side. And it doesn't actually take a ton of artistic knowledge to look at the amount of skill that was required in creating that art, which buys you a few minutes to go, I don't understand this, but I can tell it was incredibly hard to make. Let's look a little closer. And I don't feel like the conservative realm has quite caught up as a movement on something like film, because funding is so difficult, but people are trying. And there are a lot more people. I mean, just in my circle of friends, I know dozens and dozens of people who want to write the next Narnia and are actively working on it. So you can, check out something like The Rabbit Room. There are a lot of novelists connected with that group that are pumping out fantastic fantasy and fantastic historical fiction. And it's only going to get better as we continue to build on the good things that the people around us are creating.
I think that's the perfect note to end on. Brian, this has been great. Thank you for joining me. And I want to give you an opportunity to plug the Anselm Society a little bit. If people want to find out and get more involved in that project or in that group of friends. And then also, if people want to stay up to date with your work in particular and what you're up to, where would you recommend they look?
Yeah, we're at anselmsociety.org, ANSELM society.org. You can get on our email list there. We're on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. We're on Substack. Honestly, if you don't live physically in Colorado, if you do, look us up, because we have events all the time and we'd love to see you. But for most of you who don't, I would recommend following our Imagination Redeemed podcast or our Substack, because that's where we're putting in a lot of our efforts to do all of this together in a dialogue kind of way. Imagination Redeemed takes the format of we'll actually tell or retell an old story, usually one that you haven't heard before, or hadn't heard since you encountered it because your English teacher made you read it and you didn't understand it then. We'll retell one of those old stories, and then we'll talk about something to do with life. We've got an episode coming up on the battle with despair and depression, and we're drawing from Edmund Spenser's Fairy Queen and the Shawshank Redemption. We like talking about real stuff, but letting art do the heavy lifting, helping us learn how to be human.
That's awesome. Very cool. Thanks again, Brian.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for listening to Conservative Conversations with ISI. If you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to check out our website at isi.org/resources, to see all that we offer our members, including the Intercollegiate Review, select Modern Age articles, debates, lectures, and of course, this podcast. Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to rate and review, and we will see you next time on Conservative Conversations with ISI.